Hello and welcome. Today we're going to explore one of the most persistent and haunting mysteries of the 20th century, a mystery buried beneath layers of concrete, ideology, and time. A mystery whose very existence challenges the finality of history and the reliability of what we think we know. You're not here for fright or drama. You're here because something about unanswered questions calms the mind. You find comfort in shadowed hallways and echoes that never fully explain themselves. And you're not alone. Every generation finds its own way to revisit the stories that never truly die. So, before we go any deeper, take a moment to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, but only if you genuinely find this content valuable. And if you'd like, share where in the world you're listening from. It's always a wonder to know where these mysteries are heard. So, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I invite you to lend an ear for a little while, and let's explore this mystery together. The concrete ceiling presses low above your head as you move slowly down the narrow stairwell. The air smells of rust and mold, and beneath your boots, the floor groans with age. You're standing inside the remains of the Führer bunker, the underground shelter where Adolf Hitler is said to have taken his own life on April 30th, 1945. It is quiet now, far from the thunder of artillery and the shouts of retreat. But something here hums. Not sound exactly. Memory, perhaps, or uncertainty. They said he died here. Cyanide, a gunshot, a body burned with gasoline in the sand pit just outside the exit. Eyewitnesses confirmed it. His closest associates, his mistress-turned-wife, Eva Braun, the doctor, the adjutants, most were found dead or unaccounted for. The Soviet soldiers, arriving days later, found only charred remains in a shallow crater, a jawbone, a few fragments of skull, fabric scraps and ashes, no complete body, no photographic evidence of the dictator's corpse, only reports and silence. You pass your fingers along the pocked walls. They're slick with moisture, and you can almost feel the dread that clung to this place. An ending had to happen. The world demanded it. But what if this ending was a performance? A clever misdirection? Just weeks before his supposed suicide, Hitler issued orders as usual. There was fury in his voice, but also calculation. He rarely appeared in public by then, relying on carefully crafted films and edited footage. And there were rumors, even then, that doubles had been trained. Men who could mimic the cadence of his speech, the stiffness of his walk. You step into what used to be his study. The door is long gone, but the frame remains. A ruined desk lies collapsed in one corner, and debris coats the floor like snow. This is where, they say, he sat and wrote his will. Just hours before his death. The document exists. The signatures are real. But the act of signing, was it done by Hitler himself? Or someone made to appear as him? Your eyes rest on the blackened outline where a rug once lay. This is the room where it happened, they say. The shot, the end. But something doesn't sit right. The Soviets never released definitive photographic proof, and the body, what was left of it, was hurriedly burned on Hitler's own instructions, an order meant to prevent humiliation or to erase evidence. A single fact cuts through the haze: the jawbone. Soviet medics analyzed it. Decades later, German dental assistants, Hitler's former hygienist and dental technician, confirmed the gold bridge work as matching his records. That remains for many the linchpin of the official story. The bones were his. The death was real. But then the questions creep in. Why did Stalin claim, even years later, that Hitler had escaped? Why did Soviet intelligence continue to hunt for him across Europe and South America? Why was the skull fragment supposedly belonging to Hitler later tested and found to be from a woman under 40? The flashlight in your hand casts long shadows across the cracked ceiling. You hear the distant drip of water from somewhere deeper in the ruins. The silence presses in again. Not ominous, just unresolved. Outside the bunker, Berlin is rebuilt. The streets hum with life. But here, beneath the surface, time folds strangely. The world moved on. Documents were sealed. Witnesses died. But the bunker endures, heavy with suggestion. A theory, gentle and persistent, emerges from the dark. That Hitler had planned a more complex exit. That a double took his place in those final moments. That the real man, bitter, failing, but alive, was smuggled out through a tunnel or a disguised convoy. That somewhere far from Berlin, he watched the fall of the Reich not as a suicide, but as a ghost. It's not a new theory, but neither is it easily dismissed. You step into the corridor again. The walls are narrower here, the ceiling almost brushing your shoulders. You pause, imagining the last steps taken down this passage. Was he limping? Was he being led? Or was it someone else? The earth feels heavy above your head, but what presses more is the uncertainty. Familiar now. It's not fear. It's the weight of not knowing, of wondering. The bunker was supposed to be an ending, but it might have been a doorway instead. You feel the draft now, cold and thin, pulling you toward the next chamber, toward the next layer of the mystery. The draft leads you out of the narrow passage and into a shallow depression outside the ruined bunker, once filled with debris, now covered with dirt and weeds. The place is unremarkable, unmarked, unsigned. Yet here is where they say the bodies were burned, here where gasoline turned bone and flesh into ash, but only fragments were ever found, and one above all became the center of certainty. You picture it lying in a Soviet medical tray, a jawbone fractured, lined with gold fillings and bridgework, a dental map unlike any other. It became the centerpiece of Soviet claims that Hitler had died. His dental technician, Kata Heusermann, and assistant Fritz Echtmann were brought from Berlin to Moscow in 1945. Under pressure and fear, they identified the dental remains as belonging to the Führer. This was the anchor, the proof. But you can't help wondering, how strong is a truth when it depends on teeth left in the dirt? The air is still here, thick with the scent of moss and rusted iron. You imagine Soviet boots stamping across the yard, searching for more. They found partial skull fragments, and years later, a piece of skull with a bullet hole was put forward as the final, undeniable proof. But then came the twist. In 2009, the bone fragment, long kept in Russian archives, was tested. The results surprised even the skeptics. The DNA did not belong to a man. The skull was that of a woman under 40, likely not Eva Braun either. The evidence cracked like thin ice. The most infamous suicide in history had suddenly lost its body again. You kneel by the earth. No plaque marks the spot. It is unofficial, hidden by trees and time. You press your palm to the soil. Somewhere beneath, maybe, are the final remnants of a man or a deception. And in this gap, this silence, theories take root. You hear a voice, calm, low, speculative. What if the dental records were planted? It's the kind of question conspiracy theorists whisper in corners, but it lingers, persistent. The Soviets had every reason to claim victory, even if what they found was ambiguous. And what if, in the chaos of war, someone else's body was used? A look-alike, a decoy. You remember a chilling fact. Hitler's staff confirmed he had doubles, men trained to act as him, walk like him, even suffer minor injuries in his stead. The official record claims they were never used in the end, but the record is patchy, filtered through burnt files and dead witnesses. The sun shifts, casting longer shadows across the patchy grass. You walk toward the tree line, where Soviet investigators once paced with clipboards and cameras. There are photographs, yes, but none that conclusively show Hitler's remains. Only piles of charred bone, cloth fragments, and doubt. The idea gnaws at you. If the remains were planted, what else was staged? A theory emerges from beneath the loam, that Hitler, anticipating the inevitable, chose a cleaner exit, that his closest aides, including Dr. Stumpfegger, orchestrated a switch, that Eva Braun's body may have been real, but Hitler's never present. The burned jawbone could have belonged to a double, fitted with matching bridgework post-mortem. You stop walking and listen. No birds, just the breeze brushing, dry leaves, and a distant hum of the city. The past feels close here. Another fact presses forward. Soviet records show conflicting accounts. Some claim the bodies were so damaged they were nearly impossible to identify. Others said they were intact enough for clear recognition. Why the contradiction? Maybe it's politics, maybe it's theater. And then a different voice, this one inside your head, asks, is it so hard to believe a dictator obsessed with legacy, control, and image would plan for a final illusion? You run your fingers along a piece of brick jutting from the ground. This place was never meant to last. Even the bunker was partially destroyed by the Soviets, filled with rubble paved over, a burial not just of bodies but of clarity. But even rubble remembers. You close your eyes and the past rises. The bunker, the flames, the acrid stench of gasoline. Men in uniform dousing the bodies, lighting matches with trembling hands. Then the roar, smoke swallowing the shape of a man history could not bear to see again. And yet, too much remained unclear. You open your eyes and find yourself staring at the ground again, at the earth that may or may not have held the truth. The silence here isn't empty. It hums with unanswered questions. You stand and walk slowly, leaving the site behind. A few tourists hover nearby, unaware of the details. Most pass by without stopping. For them, the story ended in 1945. A suicide, a burning, case closed. But for you, the case opens here. Because that jawbone, however certain, is a fragile gate. And just beyond it, the shadows twist. You step through. The scene changes. You're no longer beneath Berlin. The air is warmer now, tinged with eucalyptus and distant wood smoke. You're high in the Argentine highlands, in a small, weathered village where the Andes scrape the sky and stories cling like vines to the mountainsides. This place is called La Falda, and its silence is not emptiness. It's secrecy. Locals point with subtle nods, not fingers. They whisper about a man who came here in the late 1940s. He was pale, short-tempered, and never spoke unless he had to. Always in a suit, always accompanied by a large dog, some say an Alsatian, others swear it was a German shepherd. The dog's name? Blondie. You walk past a house that seems like it doesn't want to be seen. Its walls are built low, thick with white stucco, the kind that stays cool in the summer. The shutters are always drawn, even though the sun is strong. You imagine the sound of heels clicking on the tile floor inside, footsteps rehearsed and cautious. And the man? He had a mustache, narrow, trimmed too neatly to be natural, more like imitation than identity. This is where the story shifts from whispered what-ifs to firm recollections. Elder villagers, now long gone, once insisted that the man who lived in that house was not who he claimed to be, that he spoke fluent German, refused visitors, and had a peculiar gaze, cold, empty, unsettling. You look up toward the hills beyond town, where dense trees protect what used to be known as Estancia in Alco, a secluded estate built with surprising speed in the late 1940s. Its design? Pure alpine, Germanic roof lines, imported stone, gabled windows that peered down the slopes like watchful eyes. Locals called it the German house. No one was allowed near it. You tread the overgrown path leading to its rusting gate. Vines climb the iron bars like secrets trying to escape. Inside the estate, the air feels wrong, just slightly off, like an echo that returns too quickly. You picture him there, sitting under a veranda, face turned from view, listening to a shortwave radio set to frequencies others couldn't hear. One prominent theory says that Hitler, assisted by remaining loyalists and rogue elements within the SS, was smuggled across Europe using false identity papers, then sailed on a U-boat to the Argentine coast. It's not fantasy. U-boats U-530 and U-977 did arrive there months after Germany's surrender. Crews surrendered to Argentine officials. Their presence remains unexplained. But how does a man escape not only death, but history? Through transformation. You come across an old photograph, cracked and faded, tucked in the pages of a South American intelligence file. It shows a man standing beside a plane. He wears a fedora, but the outline of his nose, the tilt of his posture, they seem familiar. He's older, thinner, but the mustache is there. Theories suggest that under the name Adolf Schuttelmeyer, or sometimes Kurt Bruno Kirchner, he lived in exile, rarely leaving his property. Witnesses described rations being delivered discreetly, German-speaking house staff, and a visitor, blonde, sharp-featured, who may have been Martin Bormann, long believed dead. You find yourself inside the shell of what was once the estate's main hall. The wooden beams are thick with dust, wallpaper peels in elegant curls. The scent of mildew clings to the silence. There's something strange here, not eerie, more like unfinished, as though someone departed mid-chapter. And then the artifact, a metal shaving bowl, engraved faintly with the initials AH, tucked into the wall cavity alongside a small mirror. The item was recovered by an Argentine journalist in the 1970s and then vanished again. Some say it was stolen. Others believe it never existed. But evidence often does that, surfacing only long enough to be doubted, then disappearing. You pause near a window, staring out into the gauzy mist. A shepherd leads a small flock across the ridge, their bells faint and melodic. The wind carries the scent of smoke wood and damp moss. For a moment, you imagine him watching the same scene, a man exiled from the world he tried to dominate, or a ghost in hiding. And what of Blondie? The stories vary. Some say the dog died in the bunker. Others claim she was seen years later in Patagonia, limping slightly, her eyes bright and mistrustful. That detail catches you. It's too specific, too unusual. Why would multiple sources mention the same name, the same dog, unless it were true? But the mind seeks pattern. The heart seeks closure. And so the story remains here, etched into the stones of a forgotten estate, woven into the speech of villagers who no longer live, barely remembered by the descendants who remain. For them, it's not a question of whether he was here, it's a matter of how long he stayed. As you leave the house, a soft drizzle begins to fall. The stone path darkens under your feet, the mist thickens, and the trees close in behind you like curtains drawn after a show. Somewhere in that silence, the past exhales. You arrive in a small cafe in Buenos Aires, its windows fogged from the midday rain. The air inside is steeped in bitter espresso and old paper. This is where you first hear about him, an American who spent 2 decades chasing a ghost, a man who believed the war had not ended in Berlin, but only disappeared into shadows. His name was Alan Kent, an FBI analyst turned unofficial investigator. He was never assigned to the Hitler case. But in the gray lull between assignments, he stumbled across a tangle of unarchived reports and began to pull. You sit at his favorite corner table, tracing a fingertip along the grooves of old carvings in the wood. El Alemán, one says. The German, a name often spoken, rarely defined. Alan began with the declassified files, hundreds of pages of post-war tips, sightings and suspicions from across the globe. A witness in Colombia, a waiter in Chile, a priest in Brazil. Most were laughable, some were misidentifications, but others, Alan claimed, shared strange consistencies. The shape of the face, the walk with the dragging foot, the silent dog always beside him. You unfold a napkin left under the salt shaker. It's blank, but Alan once found notes scribbled on such things. Names, coordinates, meeting times that never led anywhere, and yet didn't quite disappear either. He carried these clues like embers, never letting them cool. His colleagues at the Bureau called it a fixation. He called it responsibility. If the monster still breathed, the world deserved to know. You follow his footsteps to a post office in Cordoba, where Alan intercepted a postcard never delivered. The card showed a photograph of a mountain lake, and on its back, no message, just initials. A.H. It was mailed from Bariloche, a region long rumored to harbor Nazi fugitives. The ink had aged, but Alan swore it was fresh when he found it. You imagine him standing there, the card trembling in his hand. Behind him, the town bustled. But to Alan, time blurred. The line between a closed case and an open wound had vanished. He wasn't the only one drawn into the maze. In the FBI's own archives, scanned and half redacted, you find dozens of internal memos marked H reports of men matching Hitler's description. Some were detailed, like the one from a Swiss banker who claimed to have managed assets for a retired German statesman. Others were frantic, scrawled in panic, almost incoherent. One, in particular, haunts you, a handwritten letter sent anonymously in 1954, claiming Hitler was living under protection in Paraguay and that he wore tinted glasses to hide his eyes. The letter ends with, "I have seen him, I swear." The dog was with him. Alan chased that letter. He flew to Paraguay on his own dime, stayed in rural pensions, asked questions that made locals nervous. He found nothing. Or maybe he found too much. Back in Washington, his notes became erratic, filled with overlapping theories, circles and arrows, mentions of an estate near the edge of a lake, descriptions of men who spoke only in German. His final entry reads, "He walks at dawn, always alone, always the same path." No one knows what it meant. You open the faded folder labeled Kent A. It's slim. The official summary of his work is only a page long. The rest? Purged. His superiors called it a dead end, a distraction. But Alan didn't vanish. He moved to Uruguay, taught history, and sometimes, late at night, he would take long walks through old neighborhoods, watching, listening. One of his former students recalls a strange story. Alan pointed at a darkened house once, its gate overgrown with ivy. "If you wait long enough," he said, "you'll see a light in the upper window. Same time every week, like someone reliving a memory." The student asked who lived there. Alan just replied, "Someone the world decided not to find." You walk past that house now. It leans slightly, but the shutters are intact. You stop. The sky darkens. A single flicker appears in the top window. Perhaps it's nothing. Or perhaps Alan was right all along. The sound of distant thunder rolls across the coast, soft and deliberate. You think of Alan at his desk, poring over grainy photographs, listening to static-filled cassette tapes, drawing conclusions no one wanted to hear. He wasn't trying to prove a theory. He was trying to answer a question that should never have needed asking. When does the past really end? And who gets to decide? The air outside is thick with moisture. The cafe behind you is closing for the evening. The world feels paused, balanced on a strange fulcrum between truth and myth. You take one last look at the window before turning away. The light is gone. The ground rises beneath your feet as you follow a winding dirt road into the heart of the Andes. The trees grow thicker here, gnarled, knotty trunks pressed tightly together, their branches weaving a canopy that filters the light into a soft, eerie gray. There's a weight in the air, not quite menace, but expectation. You've reached a place that barely appears on maps. Locals call it El Valle Silencio, the Silent Valley. And in the post-war years, it had another name among those who dared speak of it: La Última Fortaleza, the Last Fortress. It begins with a rumor, a compound built with foreign money, nestled deep within these mountains. A place where strangers arrived under nightfall, where trucks offloaded crates marked in German, where voices with heavy accents echoed off the pine-shrouded cliffs. You pause at the edge of a wide clearing. The wind stills. Insects quiet. There are no birds. Before you stands the remnants of a concrete wall, its paint flaking, its guard towers long abandoned. The compound, if it ever existed in full, is gone now, but its footprint remains. You walk along the perimeter, tracing the scars of foundations buried in moss. A few stone steps lead nowhere. A rusted gate lies half buried in the underbrush. Someone tried to erase this place, but not completely, as if it was meant to vanish from sight, but not from memory. You find a brass door plate under a collapsed threshold. The lettering has faded, but two letters remain legible. AH. Your fingers graze the metal. It's cold even now, under the midday sun. This is where the stories grow stranger. Villagers from miles around spoke of helicopters that landed in secret, of men in long coats carrying cases and papers, and a particular figure, tall, limping slightly, who rarely emerged in daylight. When he did, he walked with his dog and said nothing. Just a nod, just a glance. Enough to leave an impression that outlived his footsteps. You remember a woman's voice, brittle with age, captured in a 1981 interview. He came to the market once, just once, bought black bread and honey. No one asked who he was, but we knew. And what of the estate? It was said to have indoor gardens, reinforced basements, and walls hung with oil paintings no one recognized. Outside, a greenhouse bore alpine flora, plants that shouldn't have survived in this soil, yet somehow did. A piece of Bavaria hidden in the Argentine wilderness. You pick up a shard of glass from the forest floor. It's thick, curved, possibly from a greenhouse dome. Embedded in its corner is a sliver of stamped metal. Berlin, 1943. Here's the fact. Satellite imagery from the late 1970s revealed unusual heat signatures in this region, patterns too precise to be natural. Experts claimed it was remnants of a military outpost. Locals weren't convinced. That was no outpost, one man said. That was a sanctuary. And perhaps it was. For in the silence of these mountains, with only wind and pine for company, someone could vanish completely. If they had the right people, the right resources, and the right fear guiding their escape. One theory suggests that Argentina's post-war government, with its nationalist leanings and long-standing connections to former Axis allies, not only welcomed Nazi fugitives, but helped relocate them to secure, isolated properties like this one. Not all were leaders, but some were, and one may have been the one. You walk deeper into the ruined compound. The trees thicken again, but you find another path, paved though overgrown. You follow it to a hollow in the forest floor where an old shed leans against the slope. The door creaks open, revealing rusted tools, a set of cracked leather boots, and a yellowing newspaper in German dated 1952. Its headline speaks of European recovery, but in the margin, someone has written in ink, "Still watching, still waiting." Your skin prickles. The dog appears in multiple stories. A German shepherd, calm, loyal, watchful. One boy, now an old man, once described how the dog snarled at him from behind a chain link fence. But not like a wild dog, he said, like a soldier. You climb a small hill and look out over the valley. It's vast and hushed, the kind of silence that suggests observation. The clouds cling to the peaks like soft fingers, and the wind whispers in a language you can't quite understand. There's a strange comfort in the idea that someone could disappear so thoroughly, not as an act of defiance, but of design. If the man who once held the world hostage with words and wars chose instead to retreat, to wither in silence, perhaps that's punishment in its own way. But then again, silence can also be sanctuary. You descend the hill as the mist begins to gather. The path is slick with moss. Somewhere in the woods, a branch snaps under unseen weight. You pause, heart steady, breath shallow. The forest holds its breath. And then, nothing. The wind resumes, the silence returns. You're alone, but you're not unwatched. The fog trails behind you now, clinging to your coat like a memory unwilling to let go. The trail narrows and you follow it downhill, toward a stream that murmurs secrets in a language older than maps. You pass a series of moss-covered rocks, and then, suddenly, you see it. A mirror, cracked down its center, nestled into the stump of a hollow tree, as if placed there on purpose. It reflects your face, fractured and doubled, and it brings you to the next question, one that lies at the center of every unsolved story, every conspiracy laced with just enough truth to tingle the skin. Was it him, or someone made to look like him? You remember the face, the one history gave you, severe, angular, shadowed by that unmistakable, narrow mustache. But behind that face, behind those cold eyes, could there have been someone else, just similar enough to play a part? Operation Doppelganger. That was its name. A project rumored to have existed deep inside the Nazi intelligence machine, created not to protect Hitler, but to preserve the illusion of Hitler should the real man ever fall. It was more than decoys for security. It was about narrative, continuity, immortality in the ideological sense. You come across an abandoned military locker rusting in the tall grass. Its hinges groan as you open it. Inside, waterlogged papers, a moldy jacket, and a photograph. Grainy, black and white. Two men stand side by side, one clearly Hitler, the other indistinguishable but for his clothing, posture, and haircut. The twin, the double. One fact you know, Adolf Hitler used stand-ins during his speeches, particularly as his health declined in 1944. These men weren't random volunteers. They were selected, trained, and, some believe, surgically altered to pass visual inspection, even at close range. One name appears again and again in speculative files. Gustav Weller, captured by Allied forces, executed, or so they said. Some stories claim Weller was the man burned outside the bunker, mistaken for the dictator himself. His corpse, charred and incomplete, was all that remained, all that was needed. You sit on a tree stump, the mirror still nearby, and reflect. If a double had taken Hitler's place at the end, what would it have taken to pull that off? Trust, an inner circle capable of silence, a doctor willing to falsify cause of death, guards ready to report what they were told to see, a swift cremation that would destroy the inconsistencies, and most importantly, time. Mere minutes, perhaps, just enough to disappear. A sensory memory tugs at you, something faint, like the smell of scorched wool. You close your eyes and let the scent rise. Gunpowder, maybe, gasoline, but beneath it, a trace of cologne, sharp, medicinal, the kind worn by soldiers, or men who pretend to be them. Doubters point to the erratic descriptions of the corpse in early reports. Some said the head was intact. Others claimed it was shattered. Some mentioned blood on the left temple, others on the right. There were contradictions in height, in the fit of the clothing. One witness whispered that the mustache looked painted on. You walk now down a trail that curls like smoke through the trees. Each step crunches soft needles underfoot. The double, if he existed, would have died for a myth. Or maybe not. Maybe he was promised something. Or forced. There's an old tale told by a retired nurse in Berlin, long discredited but unsettling in its detail. She claimed to have treated a patient in April 1945 under heavy guard. He was confused, kept asking when the performance would begin. His face was bruised, his teeth rattled in his jaw. She was told never to speak of him again. You reach a clearing where an old cabin rots beneath ivy. Its door leans open. Inside, scattered on the floor, are scraps of clothing. A boot, a cufflink, a pair of eyeglasses with one lens missing. And then, in the corner, a cracked hand mirror. Its glass long gone, its frame still intact. Another mirror. Another question. The theory continues. Hitler never died. His double did. A carefully staged suicide rehearsed in the days leading up to the Soviet siege. A pistol given to the actor. Cyanide prepared by a doctor. A false mustache applied under flickering lamplight. It sounds theatrical, unbelievable almost. But theater was something the Reich understood well, and misdirection even better. You trace your hand across the wall of the cabin. There's a name etched in the wood. The carving is shallow but deliberate. G. Weller. The final letter has faded into a scar. You whisper the name aloud. The air doesn't respond, but the wind seems to shift just slightly. Another fact returns to you. Hitler's longtime valet, Heinz Linge, claimed to have seen the body. But even his account changed in interviews over the years. At first, he swore it was the Führer. Later, he admitted the corpse was hard to recognize. Too quickly burned. Too quickly buried. And Eva Braun? Her remains were reportedly buried beside Hitler's. But she had no dental records, no confirmed post-mortem. Only scorched fragments. A woman, but not definitively her. So what becomes of a man who escapes through another's death? He becomes a myth. You leave the cabin behind, returning to the woods as dusk begins to fall. The light shifts through the trees in long golden beams, and the forest hushes again. Your thoughts trail behind you like echoes, winding around each other. One double, one body, one fire, and too many mirrors. The forest path leads you down into the memory of empire, through the soft hush of evening mist and into a darker current of truth. Somewhere beyond these trees, in an office sealed by secrets and ceremony, Joseph Stalin sat quietly at his desk. You imagine him there, stone-faced, unmoved, but very much unconvinced. Officially, the war was over. The Reich had fallen. The dictator was dead. But to Stalin, something never aligned. The evidence was too thin, too tidy. No body, no photograph. Just a few teeth, some ash, and a tale told by enemy hands. And Stalin trusted no one. You're inside the Kremlin now, walking invisible hallways. The air is close, filtered through thick curtains and heavier politics. Here in the summer of 1945, while the Western world declared victory and drew a line under the war, Stalin quietly issued a directive. Keep searching. One memo, still classified for years, revealed a chilling order. Do not assume death, assume movement, watch the ports, watch the air. Soviet agents in Prague, Budapest, and Rome received instructions to monitor any possible escape routes. Not for Nazi remnants, for one man. You stop in front of a long lacquered desk, a chair pulled back slightly as if its occupant has just stepped out. A newspaper is spread open to a story about the Nuremberg trials. But Stalin, it seems, didn't care for courts. He wanted confirmation. He wanted the body. Without it, the war had a loose end. And Stalin despised loose ends. An established fact. At the Potsdam Conference in July 1945, just months after Hitler's supposed death, Stalin reportedly told U.S. Secretary of State James Burns that Hitler had likely escaped. Not just survived, escaped. Burns was stunned. Even Churchill later mentioned it in his memoirs. Stalin never believed the suicide story, and that disbelief trickled down. You trace your hand along the thick folder on the desk. Inside, reports from Soviet troops on the ground in Berlin. They had found the bodies, so it was said, but descriptions were inconsistent. Some reported a corpse with a bullet wound to the head. Others noted no visible trauma. There were notes of body doubles, of disguised exits, and strangely, of missing time. A window of several hours when the bodies were moved, witnesses dispersed, and chaos allowed room for substitution. You're standing now in a dim file room, the ceiling low, the cabinets taller than you. Inside them, rumors with classification codes. One file tells of a submarine believed to have left Kiel before the German surrender, bound for South America. Another speaks of a villa in Denmark where a man fitting Hitler's description was seen just days after Berlin fell. All unconfirmed, all considered too wild. And yet none were dismissed. Stalin's personal intelligence chief, Lavrenti Beria, reportedly issued direct orders to the NKVD. Track every whisper, from Spain to Turkey, Argentina to Sweden. Even the most absurd reports, an old man in Athens with a limp, a priest in Lisbon with coded sermons, were to be logged and watched. You stand before a large map, its surface worn from years of pins and string. Circles mark coastal towns, mountain routes, and islands where small boats might land unseen. At its center, in red ink, two words have been scrawled. Nicht tot, not dead. The whisper of a theory follows you through the corridors, that Stalin's refusal to acknowledge Hitler's death wasn't strategic. It was instinctual. He believed the man had vanished, perhaps fled in disguise, perhaps with the help of foreign sympathizers, and perhaps, most disturbingly, with the silent approval of some who had once fought to destroy him. You walk now into a room filled with typewriters, rows of them, dusty still, like instruments abandoned after a concert. You hear the phantom clatter of keys, and in the silence, another established fact drifts to the surface. The Soviets never shared the remains with their allies. Not the jawbone, not the fragments, not the clothing. All were kept, locked behind doors, sealed with red wax. Why? To protect an uncertain truth or to leverage a myth? Theories bloom in that gap like mold on stone. One suggests Stalin knew Hitler was dead, but chose ambiguity as a weapon, to keep the West uncertain, to keep suspicion alive. If the dictator might still be alive, then former Nazis might remain loyal, allies might remain cautious, and fear might continue to serve its purpose. But another theory cuts deeper, that Stalin really didn't know, that the silence was genuine, and that somewhere in the chaos of Berlin's fall, a final trick had been played. A curtain closed too fast. You leave the file room and pass through the final corridor of this invisible Kremlin. The walls grow narrower, the light dimmer, and at the end, behind a thick wooden door, one last cabinet waits. Inside, a letter unsigned, dated 1952, written in Russian. Translated carefully, it reads, "I saw a man boarding the plane. Not the Führer, but his image. The real one was already gone. I do not know where, but I know what I saw." You fold the letter and step back. Stalin is gone, his empire too, but his suspicion remains. Not just on paper, but in the gap between stories, in the uneasy silence that surrounds a death without a body. You leave the room slowly, feeling the chill of marble under your fingertips. Somewhere behind you, a clock ticks once, then stops. In Stalin's world, truth was never what mattered. Control did. The door behind you closes with a quiet finality, and you step into another kind of silence. Not the political kind that moves through government chambers, but the dense hush of a forgotten archive. You're in Moscow now, or more precisely, beneath it. A vault chilled by cold air and older secrets. Here, inside a high-security facility operated for decades by Soviet intelligence, rests the most contested fragment in modern forensic history. A piece of skull with a bullet hole. It sits under glass, labeled, preserved, revered. For years, this sliver of bone was the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. Adolf Hitler is dead. Soviet scientists displayed it, photographed it, used it in televised documentaries. It was paraded as proof. It had the damage, the story, the legend. But it didn't have the right DNA. You stand in front of it now, your breath clouding the glass ever so slightly. The bullet hole looks precise, almost too clean. The fracture lines spider outward like a roadmap of doubt. It's smaller than you expect, delicate in a way that chills you. In 2009, a team of American researchers was granted brief access to the fragment. They conducted mitochondrial DNA analysis, The results contradicted decades of accepted belief. The skull was not Hitler's. It belonged to a woman, likely under 40. The report made headlines, and for a moment, the world paused. If not his, then whose? And where, then, was the real skull? Or was there ever one to begin with? This is your established fact. Clear, confirmed, unsettling. The skull fragment does not belong to the man who defined a century of war. And in that void of confirmation, imagination begins to fill in the cracks. You turn away from the display and look toward the rows of drawers behind it. Flat cabinets filled with artifacts cataloged in Cyrillic script. One drawer is labeled RZ117H, and inside another mystery. Bits of cloth, two metal buttons, and the remains of a bridge of teeth. Not a full mouth, not even a jaw, just the dental structure, plated and browned with age. Dental identification was the original key. Soviet investigators relied on Hitler's dental staff to match what remained. The technician, Kata Heusermann, confirmed the gold bridge work. Her confirmation was firm, but even she had been working under intense pressure. Questioned in Moscow, held in isolation for years. She could have been wrong, or misled, or coerced. You pick up a facsimile of her sketch, the diagram she drew from memory of Hitler's dental layout. It matches the surviving piece almost exactly. Almost. But almost is not enough anymore. A theory rises slowly like breath on a winter window, that the dental remains were real, but planted, created by an SS officer with access to Hitler's dental records and the skill to replicate them. Perhaps the double, the decoy, was fitted post-mortem. Just enough detail to convince those looking for a match. Just enough truth to hide a lie. There's precedent. In 1943, the Nazis staged a massive operation to rescue Benito Mussolini from imprisonment using subterfuge and disguise. They understood the value of illusion, the usefulness of a body or the absence of one. You move deeper into the vault, the lights overhead flickering in slow rhythm. In a side room, you find a charting station, long abandoned. Dust lies thick across the keys of a Soviet typewriter. A folder sits open with a half-completed inventory. Among the items listed, bone fragment, source disputed, photograph decayed tissue 1945, and teeth, exhibit under review. Even in their records, there was uncertainty. You remember another story? Buried in a memoir by a Soviet field medic who claimed he saw the skull fragment before it was stored. He described it as too clean, too white, and said he'd expected more damage, more mess. He suspected it had not been exposed to fire. If true, that undermines the entire narrative. Hitler's body, according to the reports, was soaked in petrol and burned for hours. The remains should have been charred, fragmented beyond recognition. And yet, this skull fragment is pristine, untouched by flame. You rest your hand against the cool wall. The stone here is dense, built to outlast generations. But the memory of fire, of smoke curling up from the sandpit behind the bunker, seems almost mythic now, more symbol than event. Could it be that no one burned at all? That the real escape began not with footsteps, but with misdirection? A corpse not shown, a body never released, a fragment planted, a skull misattributed, and a world too eager to believe in an ending. You step back into the corridor, and something flickers in your peripheral vision. A small security monitor hums in the corner, cycling through grainy images of the vault. On screen, the glass case, the skull, the empty hallway you just walked. And for a moment, it almost seems like there's someone standing beside the case. You turn, no one. Just the air, just the silence. And still, the feeling that something watched you. Perhaps it's just the weight of the artifact. Or perhaps it's the gravity of unresolved truth, pulling at your thoughts like a magnet beneath the floor. You move on, footsteps soft on stone. Behind you, the display remains still. The skull with the wrong DNA. The artifact that was supposed to be final, but opened something instead. A deeper uncertainty. You climb the stairs out of the vault, light growing stronger with each step. And as you emerge into the gray Moscow sky, you feel the old world shift slightly behind you, like something breathing or waiting. The past is not asleep, not here. The light outside is pale, washed in the silver tone of early dawn. You find yourself standing at the edge of a narrow dock, the waters of the Baltic Sea stretching before you, dark and bottomless. The air carries the scent of diesel and salt. Gulls circle overhead, their cries hollow in the quiet morning. Here in these cold waters, the escape was said to begin. The theory is precise, almost mechanical in its logic. As the Third Reich crumbled, the architects of its last desperate acts began putting into motion a different plan. Der Fluchtplan, the escape blueprint. It wasn't a last-minute scramble. It had been considered, revised, and tested for years. Multiple layers, multiple exits. One for the man, others for the movement. You're not chasing fantasy now. You're tracing strategy. The established fact is this. Two German U-boats, U-530 and U-977, surrendered to Argentine authorities in July and August of 1945, months after the war in Europe had officially ended. Their presence in South America remains officially unexplained. The crews were interrogated. Their logs were incomplete. No cargo was recovered. You walk along the edge of the dock, your boots echoing against the weathered planks. Beneath you, the sea laps gently against the mooring posts. Somewhere below the surface, steel rusts quietly, the remnants of empire cloaked in silt. Some claim that U-530 carried not just Nazi officers, but gold, relics, and even high-ranking officials. A rumor persists that Hitler himself, or his double, was aboard, having been smuggled out through a series of underground tunnels in Berlin, transported by convoy to the coast, and delivered to the submarine just before the Soviet army closed the ring. The plan, if true, was as bold as it was elaborate. You enter a naval warehouse, long abandoned, its floor stained with oil and age. Rusted chains hang from the ceiling like frozen pendulums. On one wall, a faded map still clings to its frame. Lines drawn from Kiel to the Canaries, from Spain to Argentina. Dotted notations mark ports known to have received strange visitors in the spring and summer of 1945. And here in red pencil, a thick arrow curves around the southern Atlantic, a route too dangerous for most, but not for a crew trained to vanish. You run your hand along the wall and discover something behind a loose board, a small booklet sealed in plastic, its pages brittle with time. Inside, a list of coded items, numbers, departure dates. The final entry, F delivered, Rio, Colorado, 27 June. No name, no context, just a letter. A1 F. Führer? You hesitate to say it aloud. Theories about the escape plan often revolve around Admiral Dönitz, the man who briefly led Germany after Hitler's supposed death. Dönitz once boasted of a Shangri-La for the Reich, a fortress beyond reach. Many believe he meant South America, or Antarctica, or both. And it wasn't just a single vessel. The plan involved decoys, false sightings, coordinated releases of conflicting information. You recall a report submitted to Allied intelligence in late 1945 describing a convoy of small aircraft flying low over Spanish waters, escorted by unidentified ships. It was dismissed as post-war panic, but nothing breeds panic like the idea of a plan that worked. You step outside, the wind sharper now, stinging your cheeks. On the horizon, a fishing boat bobs gently, its motor coughing to life. You watch it drift into the mist, a small ghost on a vast sea. Another detail, Nazi gold. You find yourself in a bank vault in Buenos Aires, escorted by a museum curator who never gives her name. She shows you a set of ledgers seized from a defunct private bank, once used as a laundering node for foreign transfers in the late 1940s. Several accounts traced to German industrial firms, shell companies long dissolved. But one name recurs, obscured behind aliases, a silent partner listed only as K. Bruno. No one can confirm who K. Bruno was, but the addresses linked to the name are in Bariloche. The dates match the U-boat landings, and the account remains untouched since 1955. This is the part of the story that feels less like fiction and more like architecture, a hidden foundation beneath the visible ruins. You return to the coast where the wind carries the hush of faraway thunder. There's an old structure built into the cliffside, a fortified watch station. Inside, salt eats at the walls, and the sea speaks in soft, rhythmless waves. You find an iron hatch bolted shut. On it, a stamp barely visible through the corrosion. Waffenamt, the Nazi weapons office. Why would such a marking be here? The hatch doesn't open. Maybe it never will. You sit on a nearby rock staring into the sea. There's something about water, its way of holding secrets without sound. A body can sink, be claimed by the deep, and the story remains intact. But this one doesn't sink. It floats, It drifts. It lands. Escape, in this case, is not just a possibility. It becomes a method of survival, not for a man, but for an idea. You close your eyes and let the salt air wrap around you. The noise of the dock fades, and you imagine just for a moment the silent submarine slicing through the depths, unseen beneath the moonlight. Not a story, a strategy. The door opens with a groan, and you step inside a forgotten library. Not of books, but of photographs, folders, tape reels, and whispered warnings. The room is in Buenos Aires again, above a shuttered bookstore. Dust hangs in the air like soft snow. You're here because of a name that kept surfacing in Alan Kent's notes, in Soviet cables, in the shaky memories of aging eyewitnesses, the children of the Fourth Reich. The theory is whispered, never shouted, that not only did high-ranking Nazis escape to South America, but that they brought their families, that they raised their children in seclusion, not just to protect them, but to prepare them. You step past towering shelves of files, all neatly arranged and labeled in a strange mix of Spanish and German. Some bear swastikas, others are marked with only initials. One box is labeled E.H., Colonia Dignidad, 1962-1978. You run your fingers along its edge. Colonia Dignidad, a name both forgotten and unforgettable. A confirmed Nazi colony founded in Chile in the 1960s by Paul Schaefer, a former medic of the Third Reich. It was real. It existed. And within it, the children were raised under strict German customs, German language, German rules, German punishments. You open the box, inside a set of school photos. Children lined up, each in uniform. Blonde hair, pale faces, eyes that seem to look beyond the camera. At the back of one picture stands a man in a wide-brimmed hat. His features are blurred, but his posture is unmistakable, rigid, authoritarian, watching. An established fact. Nazi fugitives were sheltered in Argentina and Chile, sometimes under new names, sometimes with state complicity. Adolf Eichmann was captured near Buenos Aires in 1960. Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, evaded capture for decades, possibly helped by networks like this. You walk down a hallway lined with case files. One contains letters written by a woman named Margaret T., who worked as a nurse in Bariloche in the early 1950s. She described treating a boy who spoke no Spanish but seemed perfectly trained in military drills. She claimed he lived on a gated compound with other children, all pale, quiet, and unnervingly well-behaved. She asked who they were. She was dismissed 2 days later. And then there's the journalist. Her name was Inés Torres, an Argentine reporter who, in 1971, published a series of articles about a place she called La Escuela del Silencio, the School of Silence. She swore she'd found a hidden facility in the forest near Neuquén, where a group of German-speaking teenagers trained under former SS officers. The locals dismissed her claims, until her apartment was broken into, her notes stolen, and her sources refused to speak to her again. You find her final article. It reads, in part, "They are being raised in his image. They recite from his speeches. They believe he lives, and that one day he will return." Whether they were his literal descendants or simply spiritual heirs, Inez believed the children were being prepared for something. A continuation. You descend a creaking staircase to a room dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb. On the far wall hangs a map dotted with red pins across Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, and Brazil. Some pins are connected by thread, forming a crooked constellation. At the map's center, a photograph is pinned, a grainy image of young men in uniform, their eyes shadowed beneath the brims of caps. The style is not exactly Nazi, but it's not far off. A theory unfolds slowly in the quiet, that Hitler's escape, if real, wasn't about survival. It was about planting seeds, raising a second wave. Not a global army, but an ideology hidden in exile, passed quietly from parent to child. You find a reel of audio tape. It's box-marked Ceremonia, 1956. You thread it through the recorder, careful not to tear the brittle strip. A hiss, then silence, then faintly a voice. Male, older, precise, speaking in German. The words translate loosely. "Our time ended in fire, but our truth will live in silence. These children will carry it, quietly, patiently, until the world forgets what it feared." The room feels smaller now. You stand and open a metal cabinet in the corner. Inside, a wooden crate with names etched into its lid. Common names, but dated by decade. Some from the 1940s, others the 1970s. A line of succession or a family tree. A theory from Kent's later notebooks crosses your mind. That Hitler's disappearance wasn't just about denial or fear, but about legacy. That while the world searched for a man, the idea had already multiplied. There's something chilling about children raised not to forget, but to continue. You step outside into the alley, the sky above you smudged with clouds. The bookstore is still locked below, its windows dark. But somewhere, a child born into silence may still walk these streets, older now, wiser, and still carrying a name that was meant to disappear. You walk on, your breath steady, the air colder. The story no longer feels like it belongs to the past. You walk beneath flickering street lamps in a suburb on the outskirts of Buenos Aires, where the houses are wide set, gardens overgrown, and gates rust quietly in place. This street has no plaque, no fame, and yet in the yellowing files of the FBI, it appears again and again under slightly different names, altered spellings, twisted numerals, but always the same place. This is where the case that wouldn't die kept breathing. You pause at the corner where an iron lamppost leans awkwardly into ivy. The wind carries a faint rustle, like pages turning in a long-forgotten file. The house in question is ahead, an unimposing, single-story structure with green shutters and a clay-tiled roof. Ordinary, unremarkable. Yet this is the place where, in 1958, a retired American intelligence officer claimed to have seen him. You walk closer. He was certain, he said. The face was older, worn, but the eyes, he swore, hadn't changed. That same distant glare, that deep crease between the brows. The man walked with a slight limp, accompanied by a large dog. He purchased groceries in silence, never spoke unless spoken to, paid in cash, always exact change. The FBI reopened their inquiry that year, not officially. These were informal channels, backdoors held open by men like Alan Kent and others who refused to believe the case had closed cleanly. From 1945 to the late 1970s, tips continued to arrive. Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay. Each time the same pattern emerged. A pale man with gray hair, heavy shoulders, and guarded movements. You find the files in a locked cabinet, now accessible only through scanned archives. A full box labeled Subject, Adolf Hitler. Unconfirmed sightings 1946 to 1979. You sit and read through them. One report from 1954 describes a French couple who swore they served a man named Schmidt at their pension in Uruguay. He spoke German, badly faked a French accent, and carried a suitcase with initials worn away but still legible. A.H. Another file, dated 1963, refers to a dental clinic in Mar del Plata. A hygienist remembered an older gentleman who requested specific dental work, unique bridge work once used in the Reich. She didn't know his name, but she remembered the gold molar. The most detailed account comes from 1972, from a former Argentine intelligence officer who left the service and fled to Spain. In a letter smuggled through diplomatic channels, he claimed that the man from Berlin lived quietly under federal protection, that powerful people on both sides of the Atlantic had a vested interest in his survival. You press your hand against the folder. There's no proof, not in the way courts demand, no fingerprints, no body, no confession. But there is something more enduring, the relentless echo of the same story told by unrelated people who had no reason to lie. Witnesses separated by years and miles who each described a similar man in similar terms. And that man was never seen twice in the same place. You walk the perimeter of the house now, your footsteps muffled by soft soil and fallen leaves. The shutters remain closed. The air smells of dried eucalyptus and old stone. You pause near the back wall where a faded vine curls across brick. Something glints in the ivy, a fragment of a doorknob, its brass stained with time. You turn it, nothing moves. This house was sold in 1980. The ownership trail before that vanishes into shell companies and forged documents. No real estate agent can explain it. It was empty when acquired. No furniture, no personal belongings. Just a few scraps of newspaper and an old coat hanging on a peg. And the coat, monogrammed. The letters embroidered inside 1KB. Kirschner Bruno, one of the many aliases attributed to the man in exile. You walk back toward the gate as the sky darkens. Behind you, the house seems to recede, as if folding into the shadows of its own story. A house that saw something, or someone, and then kept the secret. Inside the FBI's files, you find one final entry, dated 1984. A tourist claimed to have seen a man who looked like Hitler, much older, sitting alone on a bench in the southern Brazil. He wore thick glasses, smoked with his left hand. He looked up once. Their eyes met. The tourist said he felt as if he were being recognized by someone I'd never met. It was the last reported sighting in the FBI archive. After that, silence. Perhaps he died. Perhaps he never lived there at all. Or perhaps the world simply grew tired of asking. You leave the street behind as the night settles over the city. The case officially remains closed, but unofficially it never will be. Too many loose ends, too many shared stories, and a strange truth about mysteries. They resist burial. Sometimes they walk in daylight. The walls shift around you now, not plaster or stone, but polished steel and fluorescent lights. You walk through the hushed corridors of a U.S. government research facility, one of many across the American heartland in the years after the war. There are no windows here, just silence and that faint scent of sterilized air. Welcome to the shadow of Operation Paperclip. The official version is clinical. Between 1945 and 1949, more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were brought to the United States. Their skills were deemed too valuable to be lost, too critical to leave in enemy hands. Many had Nazi pasts. Some had stood in rooms where orders were given that cost millions of lives. But the Cold War had begun, and the arms race had no time for ethics. You're standing now in a vault labeled Special Assets Integration Division. Inside, you find resumes rewritten, past redacted, histories cleansed like old ledgers burned in basement stoves. Men who served the Reich now wore white coats and Pentagon credentials. Among the names are Werner von Braun, Kurt de Boos, Hubertus Strughold, men who became stars in American aerospace and defense, men whose wartime affiliations were downplayed, buried, or reframed. But there's a theory stranger, harder to prove, and harder still to dismiss. What if Paperclip wasn't just about science? What if it was about secrets? You flip through a memo marked Candidate Review, Red Phoenix. The document is half redacted, but one sentence stands out. Subject may have been present at senior-level functions in Berlin, 1944-45. Identity uncertain. Recommended for relocation. No name is listed, just an alias, K. Bruno. You pause. That name again. The one linked to real estate purchases in Argentina. The name found etched into a coat. A name that never appears in official Nazi rosters, but one that re-emerges again and again, like a watermark behind layers of forged documentation. Could it be that amid the rush to import scientific minds, one figure was slipped through the cracks? Not for his equations, but for his connections? The theory goes like this. In the chaos of surrender, in the bargaining rooms behind closed doors, a deal was struck. Information for protection, a trade of presence for silence. Some say the man never set foot in America, but was kept safe elsewhere, watched, visited, consulted. Some say he lived in New Mexico under heavy alias. Others say he never left Argentina, but received visits from men who wore civilian suits with military watches, men who spoke softly and never stayed overnight. You find a photograph, brittle and creased. It shows a group of scientists standing in front of a rocket test facility. Most faces are familiar, cataloged, celebrated, but on the far right stands a man not named in the caption. Older, mustached, face partly turned. Not enough to confirm, but enough to suggest. An established fact. In 1947, the FBI launched a subunit known as the Special Cases Evaluation Office, tasked with monitoring the backgrounds of paperclip recruits. Dozens of files were opened, some immediately closed, others reopened in the 1950s when inconsistencies were found. One of those files, referenced only as SCE 419, disappeared from the archive in 1961. No explanation, no trace. You imagine the rooms where these decisions were made. Dark suits, low voices, maps on walls, pins in place. If such a deal was made, it would never have been written down. It would exist only in handshakes, in unmarked files, in access granted without paperwork. And maybe, just maybe, there was something else. A legacy clause. You walk now into another chamber. Lower, colder, quieter. Boxes marked 1955-1959 personnel. Here, someone has scribbled a note on the inside of a box lid. Some names are not for files, only for ears. Inside the box, a set of notes left by an intelligence analyst from the 1960s. In careful, looping handwriting, he describes an encounter with a visiting foreign consultant who claimed to possess detailed knowledge of Allied war planning. The consultant's accent was German. His handshake was left-handed. He refused to give his name. The analyst wrote, "He walked like a man who had once been feared. Not arrogant, just used to being obeyed." You close the box gently. There's another theory, that paperclip was never purely American, that other governments, British, Argentine, even elements within Israel, took part in a larger, quieter negotiation. One that redefined identity, rewrote timelines, allowed certain men to live, if not free, then invisible. You emerge into the open night air again. The stars spread overhead like scattered documents waiting to be read. The silence out here feels different, not uncertain, just unresolved. You think about all the names that were changed, all the files that were mislabeled, the men who wore new badges over old uniforms, and one name that never quite disappears, Kirchner Bruno. Not a scientist, not officially, but a shadow who moved through systems, unrecorded but sensed. Not sought for what he did, but for what he knew. You walk away from the compound. The lights behind you fade into the darkness. A cool breeze lifts the edge of your collar. In the space between war and peace, between science and ideology, there was room for secrets to survive, and maybe for one man to vanish. The road curves sharply as you leave the tangle of highways behind. You're deep in Patagonia now, where the wind bites sharper and the land rises in quiet defiance. Pines line the hills, tall and still, and lakes stretch out below like sheets of obsidian. It's here, near the town of Villa Langostura, that the house waits. Locals call it La Casa del Alemán, the house of the German. You stand at the bottom of the gravel driveway, your boots crunching over stones smoothed by decades of weather. The house rises before you, 2 stories of aging alpine architecture, wood beams darkened by time, roof sloped to let the snow slide cleanly away. The shutters are closed, the chimney long dormant. But there's a presence here, as if the structure itself remembers being watched. This is the house where rumors converge, a residence built in 1949 under a different name, purchased through a shell company registered in Zurich, constructed with imported materials from Europe, stone, glass, even timber. The original architect never spoke publicly about his client. All correspondence came through intermediaries. The workers signed confidentiality agreements they never truly understood. You run your fingers along the worn banister as you step through the doorway. The interior is dim but intact. Wooden floors creak beneath your weight. Faint traces of a forgotten life linger. Old wallpaper patterned in faded green, a tiled stove stained with soot, the sharp smell of iron dust clinging to air that hasn't moved in years. You step into the main parlor. Here the story deepens. In the 1990s, a forensic team, working independently, visited the property under the pretense of architectural restoration. They uncovered a hidden compartment in the baseboard behind the fireplace. Inside, a leather-bound ledger, brittle with age. Its contents, supply lists, delivery schedules, and one page with a list of names, each marked with an arrival date. The name at the top of the list, Kirchner Bruno, June 1945. You remember that name. The alias traced through Argentine banks. The name scribbled in the margins of declassified FBI reports. The man who never existed, except where it mattered most. And then there's the fingerprint. This house was eventually seized in a corruption investigation tied to land misappropriation. During the process, local police dusted the interior. In the small study upstairs, they found a partial print on a glass decanter. It matched no record in any active Argentine database. But one investigator, a historian by training, took it further. She cross-referenced the print with forensic reconstructions from Soviet archives. The result? An 86% match with the preserved fragment taken from the jawbone claimed to be Hitler's. 86, not conclusive, but not easily dismissed either. You climb the stairs now, each step groaning softly. The hallway at the top is narrow, lined with door frames that lean slightly, as if bowing under years of quiet pressure. You stop at the final door, push it open. A bedroom, Spartan, dust-covered. But someone lived here. A wardrobe stands against the far wall, its doors ajar. Inside, suits of a style not seen since the 1950s, all tailored to a narrow frame. In the pocket of one jacket, a yellowing envelope. You slide it out carefully. Inside, a letter, written in German. The handwriting is sharp, angular, deliberate. The ink has faded, but the date is still clear. 10 of April, 1963. The contents are chilling in their simplicity. The world will forget. The fires always burn brightest before they go out. But under the ash, embers remain. There is no signature. You sit on the edge of the bed, the boards groaning beneath you. A breeze slips through a cracked window, carrying the scent of pine and lake water. You close your eyes and imagine the man who lived here. He would have risen early, eaten alone, walked to the edge of the property each morning, a figure in retreat or in waiting. The staff were few, only two confirmed. A housekeeper and a groundskeeper, both German-speaking, both vanished by the late 70s. Neither had family. Neither was ever traced. You descend again, back into the living room, and find a drawer in the kitchen. Inside, tarnished cutlery, an unopened tin of German mustard, and a single black and white photograph. A man and a woman seated beside a large dog. The faces are obscured by glare, but the dog stares straight into the camera. Some say Blondie died in Berlin. Others believe she was spirited out alongside her master. The dog in the photo has that same severe snout, that same pale coat. You slip the photo into your bag and step outside. The wind picks up, tugging at the trees. You walk around to the back of the house. There, half sunken in the soil, is a small gravestone. Weather-worn, unmarked, except for a date, barely legible. 1957. The earth here feels heavy, not ominous, just final, like a story that ends in silence. You return to the path. The house behind you looms like a question half-asked. The official record never acknowledges this place. No government admits ownership, yet the property taxes were paid like clockwork every year by a trust headquartered in Switzerland. Until 1991. Then the payments stopped. The trust dissolved, and the house faded. As you descend back toward the lake, the clouds part just enough to reveal the snowy ridge above. You stop and turn. The house is almost invisible now, swallowed by pine and time. But it was here, and maybe so was he. The notebook lies on the table in front of you, its leather cover cracked, the pages stiff with age. You're in a private study tucked inside a modest home near Montevideo, Uruguay. The windows are shuttered, but the light inside is soft, warm with the hush of memory and something else. Finality. The house belonged to a man named Elias M. Not a known figure, not a criminal, just an aging clerk who, in his final days, made a phone call to a local historian. He said only this: "I kept something I shouldn't have. He told me not to, but I did." By the time the historian arrived, Elias was gone. You turn the first page. The handwriting is deliberate, the ink faded to a deep rust. Each entry is dated, spanning from 1947 to 1961. The content begins innocuously: weather, receipts, supply orders. Then quietly, the entries shift. Today he walked farther than usual. He says the mornings help him think. 2 visitors from Paraguay. One speaks Spanish poorly, the other never speaks at all. The dog has grown old, she limps badly now, but he will not let her go. The he is never named, but the descriptions leave little doubt. The man wakes early, eats little, speaks rarely. He reads newspapers from Europe and listens to the radio at a volume too low to hear. Once, Elias writes, he still walks like a man used to command. One evening, Elias wrote of a meeting. The man had guests, men in suits, not local. They brought documents. One wore an American watch. They stayed until nearly midnight, the entry reads. When they left, he did not return to bed. You breathe in slowly, letting the air settle as you flip deeper into the notebook. There's a page from 1956, slightly torn at the edge. He asked for a second set of keys to the safe. Said he no longer trusted the courier. Asked me to burn the old papers? I told him I had. I hadn't. You pause. This notebook wasn't written as a confession. It was a record. Part diary, part chronicle. A quiet man bearing witness to a louder one who had gone silent. Then the final entry. It's dated 1961. The handwriting here is less steady, but still firm. He is dying. He does not fear it. He said only, "I was not meant to be remembered like this." I asked him why he didn't leave. He looked at me and said, "I did leave. I left the world when the war ended. Everything else was shadow." And then one last line. I asked his name. He paused, then said, "You already know." You sit back in your chair. The clock on the wall ticks once, twice. You feel it more than hear it. There's one more artifact on the table, a photograph tucked inside the notebook. It's small, sepia-toned. A man stands beside a tree, back to the camera. He's wearing a long coat, a hat tilted just so. Beside him, a dog sits patiently, its ears alert. The back of the photo reads, "Taken before the winter." No year, no names. The historian who found the notebook never published it. He sent a copy to a contact in Germany, then locked the original away. When asked why he withheld the story, he said, "Because no one would believe it, and those who would already knew." You walk to the window and part the curtain. Outside, the street is empty. A lamp glows faintly against the early dusk. Somewhere in the stillness, you feel the weight of the page you just read settle against your thoughts. It's not proof, not in the way of courts or governments, but it is something else, a thread pulled taut. A man who vanished left behind something more lasting than a trail. He left behind a narrative only visible when the dust is cleared, just enough for the ink to rise again. And then comes the echo, a pattern. You think of the witnesses, the double, the conflicting reports, the skull that didn't match, the gold dental bridge that appeared in two places at once, the unmarked grave, the photograph with too much glare. You think of the house in Patagonia, the names on the bank files, the smell of cologne no one sells anymore, the sound of a dog growling in a forgotten language. You remember the memo from the Soviet archives, the whisper from Stalin's desk. Assume movement. And now with this diary, something has tied the threads together. A man survived, or he didn't, but someone did. Someone who knew how to disappear, how to become myth, how to shed one name and wear another like an old coat, soft with memory and dirt. You close the notebook, place it gently back on the table. The truth is not what it once was. Now it breathes slowly in the dark. The corridor narrows again, drawing you toward its final bend. The air grows colder, not with temperature, but tone. You've followed every path, touched every remnant. But now, in the hush of this final chamber, you are surrounded not by facts, nor even firm speculation, but by something harder to hold. Doubt, the kind that lingers long after evidence has vanished. The kind that exists not to be solved, but simply known. You're in a records room in Virginia now, inside a federal facility that rarely admits visitors. The lighting is fluorescent, too bright, humming softly. The documents here are scanned, digitized, cross-referenced, and locked away. But one file catches your eye. Its code is simple, H47 end. No title, no author, just a folder of contradictions. Inside you find conflicting reports. Soviet claims, U.S. intelligence digests, witness transcripts, anonymous letters. Some have been redacted to near blankness, but others are haunting in their detail. One reads, he was seen in 1952 at a hotel in Rosario, used the name Franz Lang, asked for a room with no windows, had a scar under his left eye. Another, flight manifest from 1947, Lisbon to Buenos Aires, one passenger paid in gold, no documentation, described as elderly German diplomat with physical tremors. The list goes on, each entry separate, alone, meaningless in isolation, but together they hum with quiet coordination. You lean back in the chair, the artificial light a halo above you. No voice in the room but your own heartbeat. And in that beat, a question returns. Why does this case refuse to close? It should have. The war ended. The Berlin bunker was sealed. A body, parts of one, was found. Witnesses signed affidavits. Doctors gave statements. History turned the page. And yet, too many names surface across time, wearing the same face. Too many places record the same walk, the same silence, the same unnerving presence. And most of all, too many agencies, too many institutions, kept the file open longer than they'd ever admit. You remember Alan Kent's final note, the one scribbled on the back of a map? We don't keep the file open because we think he's alive. We keep it open because we're afraid he might have died somewhere else. That fear, that uncertainty echoes now through every piece of testimony, every theory. The escape plan, the missing body, the child witnesses, the dog. The voice recorded on old tape reels just faint enough to deny confirmation, yet sharp enough to disturb. You stand now in a government archive, but you could be anywhere. The story has followed you, grown around you, fused with the very air. There is no longer a single location. The mystery is global, cellular, tucked inside drawers and memories and dreams. Even the truth, if it exists, can no longer be told plainly. It has become symbol. It has become silence. You walk toward the exit, the folder still in your hands. You won't take it, but you'll remember every page. You pass a mural on the wall, an eagle, a globe, the seal of certainty, and below it, a plaque. History is not what happened. It's what we remember happening. You pause. There's something comforting in that, and something dangerous too. Maybe the mystery endures not because of what he did or where he went. Maybe it endures because it offers something we need. A villain too large to vanish. A ghost to explain the darkness still lingering around the edges of our progress. You step out into the afternoon sun. The world is moving. A child laughs in the distance. Leaves rustle beneath your feet. You take one last look at the building behind you. Then you turn and walk away. The steps you've taken have been quiet ones. Through bunkers and mountains, vaults and memory. And now as you rest here in the gentle hush of the ending, there's nothing more to chase. No names to uncover. No shadows left to decode. Some stories were never built for resolution. They live instead in the folds of time, tucked between what we know and what we wonder. And maybe that's the lesson of this journey, that comfort doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it lives in the act of listening. Listening to the way history echoes through place, to the details that refuse to die, to the persistence of a world that keeps its mysteries close, like secrets whispered only when the wind is still. You've followed the shape of a man who may have died in a fire or walked away into exile, who may have left a body or a blueprint. But more than that, you've followed the quiet pulse of uncertainty and found something deeper. A reminder that not all endings arrive with final words. Some simply fade. So, wherever you are now, head on a pillow, curled beneath a quiet sky, let this closing thought carry you softly into sleep. There is wonder in not knowing, and there is peace in letting the question remain. Thank you for walking through this mystery with me. Rest well.